Picture this. You are standing in the inner chambers of the Forbidden Palace in Luoyang. The year is 697 after the birth of Christ. Silk curtains sway in the evening breeze. Incense smoke curls toward a ceiling painted with dragons and phoenixes. And on a platform covered in cushions, worth more than most families earn in a lifetime, a 73-year-old woman reclines while a man 50 years her junior attends to her every physical need. His name is Shuer Hei. 6 years ago, he was selling cosmetics on a street corner, shouting prices to passers-by, sleeping in a rented room smaller than this woman's bed. Then one of her servants noticed something remarkable about his physical proportions and reported this discovery to her mistress. Within months, everything changed. He was ordained as a Buddhist monk, appointed abbot of one of China's holiest temples, granted command of armies, given estates worth fortunes, all because of what he could provide in this chamber. But tonight, something is wrong. You can see it in his eyes. The desperation, the fear. For 3 weeks, his summons have grown less frequent. For 3 weeks, he has watched 2 younger men emerge from these same chambers each morning. Their hair disheveled, their clothing hastily arranged, while he waited outside like a discarded garment. 2 brothers named Zhang, younger, more beautiful. More favored, the jealousy is consuming him. The desperate act of destruction he commits, the brutal punishment that follows, will show you exactly what kind of woman she is, what happens to men who displease her. But first, you need to understand how a 14-year-old girl with no power became the most powerful person in the world. Because what she did to get there makes everything else look tame. She is Wu Zetian, the only woman in 4,000 years of Chinese history to rule as emperor. Not empress, not regent, emperor. And she maintained an official government department whose sole function was recruiting attractive men from across China for her personal use. Court records suggest this departmentressed over 3,000 candidates during her decades in power. Here is what you will learn tonight. How she selected these men through examinations, measuring specific physical dimensions, what the training program involved, and what happened to men who failed. The lavish gatherings she hosted well into her 70s, surrounded by dozens of young men, competing for her attention. The psychological game she played, watching favorites destroy each other in jealousy, while she took pleasure in their desperation and the fates of those who ceased to entertain her. Subscribe right now and comment below telling me where you are watching from. She entered the imperial palace at age 14, selected for Emperor Tong's Harem based on reports of her beauty. She was ranked Karen, the 5th and lowest tier of concubine, one of hundreds of women competing for a man who could not possibly notice them all. Most women at this rank never shared the emperor's bed even once. They aged in gilded isolation, then were shipped to convents when the emperor died. Wu Zetian shared Taeyong's bed only a handful of times, over 12 years. But while other concubines complained about neglect, she used those years. She learned to read classical Chinese better than most male officials. She memorized histories of previous dynasties. She studied which concubines had risen and exactly how they had managed it. She cultivated relationships with the eunuchs, who controlled everything, and then she made her move. During Emperor Tong's final illness, Crown Prince Li visited his Tiang. Father Daily, Wu Zetian arranged to be present. She was 25, experienced in the arts of attraction. He was 21, sheltered, utterly inexperienced. The seduction happened in stages. Glances while the dying emperor slept, whispered conversations in corridors, a meeting in a garden pavilion she had arranged through bribery. By the time Tong died, the crown prince was obsessed. He wanted her so badly that he violated one of Confucianism's most sacred prohibitions, a son taking his father's woman. He did not care. Within 2 years, she was back in the palace as his concubine, but concubine was not enough. 2 women stood between her and the title of Empress, and what she did to eliminate them reveals the monster she was willing to become. She gave birth to a daughter. She waited until Empress Wang, her primary rival, came to visit the infant. Moments before Wang arrived, Wu Zetian smothered her own baby with her hands. She arranged the tiny body to look peaceful. She hid where she could watch. When Empress Wang approached, the Cradley and found the infant dead. Weishun emerged screaming accusations of murder. Her husband believed every word. Empress Wang was deposed and imprisoned along with another rival named consort Wu Zetian. Visited them personally. She ordered their hands amputated. She watched as the blades fell. She ordered their feet amputated. She watched as they screamed. She had their limbless torsos stuffed into ceramic vats filled with vinegar. The acid kept them alive, but in constant agony, could not escape. They could only float and wait for death, survive for days. Wein checked on them multiple times, confirming they still lived, reportedly asking how they enjoyed their new accommodations. Empress Wang died on the third day. Consort Xiao lasted until the fifth. This is who we are dealing with. A woman who took visible pleasure in the suffering of those who crossed her. And the pattern she established with these two women would repeat itself for the next 50 years with the men who served her. By 655, Wu Zetian was empress. By 660, her husband had suffered strokes, leaving him barely functional. She ruled in his name, making every decision while he drooled on his throne. When he died in 683, she controlled the succession completely.
Her son,
Zhongzong, became emperor. He lasted 2 months. His crime was appointing his wife's father to a position without asking permission. Wuin had him dragged from the throne, accused him of treason, and exiled him to a remote province where he would spend 14 years under armed guard, wondering if each day would be his last. She installed her younger son Risong as replacement. But this time, she did not bother with pretense. He was confined to the inner palace, forbidden from meeting anyone, forbidden from issuing orders. A puppet who existed only to make her rule, appear legitimate. Then in 690, she dispensed with the fiction entirely. She forced Ruang to abdicate. She declared a new dynasty, and she assumed the title of emperor herself. Hongdi, the sacred title no woman had held in 4,000 years of Chinese civilization. She was 66 years old. She would rule for another 15 years. And throughout those years, she maintained appetites that shocked everyone who witnessed them. Which brings us to the crane service. The official name was Funchin Bureau. Palace servants called it the crane service because crane symbolized longevity and vital energy. The department was established in the early 682s when Wu Zetian was approaching 60 and her husband could no longer satisfy her. Its sole function was identifying, recruiting, examining, and training attractive men for her personal use. The system they developed was disturbingly thorough. Scouts traveled the empire, searching for candidates. Provincial governors received confidential instructions to report any unusually attractive men with specific criteria. Height between 5 feet 7 and 6 won, age between 18 and 35, refined features, muscular, but not bulky, and most importantly, physical. Dimensions exceeding normal proportions in ways officials learned to evaluate through mandatory health inspections. Getting reported was just the beginning. What came next eliminated most candidates. Men transported to the capital faced examination by senior eunuchs, specifically trained for this evaluation. The candidates stripped completely. Eunuchs measured everything: height, shoulders, chest, waist, thighs. They examined skin for blemishes. They inspected teeth, hair, fingernails. They checked breath and body odor. Then came the assessment that actually mattered. They evaluated intimate dimensions in resting state, measuring and recording results. They induced arousal and measured again. They timed stamina. They tested recovery. They evaluated capacity for repeated performance. Everything was documented in files that became permanent records. Most men failed at this stage. What happened to failures tells you how seriously the Empress took secrecy. Wang Qing was a young scholar from Shandong, reported to the crane service after a provincial official noticed him during examinations. He was 24, handsome, educated, confident. He arrived at the capital certain his future was assured. Examination revealed a problem. His dimensions were adequate, but not exceptional. His stamina was acceptable, but not impressive. The verdict was devastating. suitable for secondary service, but not for imperial attention. The crane service did not release rejected candidates. They knew too much. Wang Qing was offered a choice: accept a minor posting in a distant province and never speak of what occurred or face consequences. He accepted the posting. He was sent to a frontier garrison near Tibet. He died of fever within 2 years. Whether that fever was natural or assisted was never determined. Men who passed examinations faced interviews about their willingness to serve however the Empress required. They were informed that disclosure meant execution for themselves and their entire extended families. They were asked if they understood, then came training. Senior eunuchs who had observed imperial intimate practices for decades served as instructors. They taught techniques using diagrams and models. They conducted practice sessions with palace women assigned to evaluate progress and report deficiencies. The training emphasized endurance above all else. The Empress required sessions lasting hours. A man who could not maintain performance was useless. A man who finished before she was satisfied would not be summoned again. The eunuchs taught breathing techniques to delay completion. They taught mental methods for redirecting focus. They taught how to read hair responses and adjust pace accordingly. Trainees who could not master these skills were assigned elsewhere and warned never to speak of why. Court records suggest approximately 3,000 candidates passed through this system over its years of operation. Not all served the Empress directly. Many failed examinations. Others were assigned to secondary roles serving favored princesses or maintained as reserves. But hundreds certainly rotated through her chambers during her decades of power. And here is what made her different from male emperors who maintained harems. She did not simply use these men. She played with them. She enjoyed watching them compete. She took visible pleasure in the desperation they displayed when her favor shifted elsewhere. The gatherings she hosted became legendary within the palace walls. Even past 70, she would summon a dozen young men to her private gardens for evenings of entertainment. They performed music for her. They recited poetry praising her beauty. They competed in games of wit and physical skill, while she watched from her cushioned platform, selecting which ones would remain when the others were dismissed. The men understood these gatherings were competitions. Winners received her attention that night. Losers returned to their quarters to wait and wonder if they would ever be summoned again. Some men attended dozens of gatherings without ever being selected. The waiting destroyed them. They became obsessed with earning her favor, studying what had worked for others, desperately trying to distinguish themselves. She encouraged this desperation. Men who feared losing her attention would do anything to keep it. She would show obvious favor to one man for weeks, summoning him nightly, showering him with gifts, letting everyone see how pleased she was. Then she would abruptly transfer her attention to another, leaving the first man frantic with confusion. What had he done wrong? How had he failed? The uncertainty was deliberate, kept them all performing at maximum capacity, terrified that any slight decline would mean permanent exile from her presence. Now let me tell you about the men whose stories survived. Xu Hei, you met him in the opening. Here is how he rose. His original name was Fun Xiaobo. He sold cosmetics on the streets of Luoyang. No education, no connections, no future. What he had was physical equipment legendary in his neighborhood. Women discussed it openly. Men observed it in baths. These rumors reached Princess Taiping, the Empress's only surviving daughter, who had developed expertise in identifying men her mother might enjoy. The princess sent a servant to verify the reports. The servant confirmed everything and more. Princess Taiping had Fun Xiaobao brought to her residence. She examined him personally. She tested not just his dimensions, but his capacity for sustained performance. She kept him for 3 days, running him through scenarios that would simulate actual service conditions. Satisfied, she bathed him, dressed him in fine clothing, and presented him to her mother as a gift. Wu Zetian examined him in her private chambers. The examination lasted several hours. She found him more than satisfactory. Within days, she had set arrangements in motion. The problem was access. Men who were not eunuchs could not enter the inner palace freely. So she had him ordained as a Buddhist monk, gave him the religious name Hai, and appointed him abbot of the White Horse Temple, one of China's holiest sites. Now he could enter the palace any time to provide spiritual counsel. For 6 years, he was her primary favorite. He visited her chambers almost daily. He arrived in afternoon and remained past midnight. The Empress rewarded him beyond imagination. Estates generating enormous income, command of armies fighting Tibetan raiders, noble titles placing him among the highest aristocracy, jewelry and silk exceeding what princes could afford. But she also enjoyed tormenting him. She would mention other men in his presence, commenting on their attractiveness, wondering aloud whether their abilities might match their appearance. She would dismiss him early some nights without explanation, leaving him to wonder whether another man was being summoned after his departure. She gave gifts to other favorites where Shuai could see, watching his face contort with jealousy while he struggled to maintain composure. This was entertainment for her. The mighty abbot who commanded armies, reduced to desperate anxiety over whether he still pleased an elderly woman. She held absolute power over him, and she made certain he never forgot it. His arrogance with others grew accordingly. He arrived late to ceremonies and shoved ministers aside. He interrupted state business to deliver trivial messages. He insulted aristocrats whose families had served the empire for generations. The incident with Chief Minister Suyangi became legendary. During a ceremony in 688, Shu'er Hayahe pushed through assembled officials to take a position near the Empress. Suyangi, the highest civil official in the empire, objected. Shu'er struck him in the face. The elderly minister fell. Blood flowed from his nose. The entire court watched in silence. The Empress did nothing. Su Lianji picked himself up, apologized to Hawaii for giving offense, and resumed his position with blood still dripping down his face. A man who had served 3 emperors with distinction, humiliated by a former street vendor, because that vendor shared the Empress's bed. She found this display amusing. Shu'er Hei's arrogance was not a problem. It was entertainment. But he made a critical mistake. He believed he was irreplaceable. He did not understand that the Crane Service had files on hundreds of men who could provide what he provided. Then the Zhang brothers arrived. Zhang Yi and Zhang Chongzong were approximately 22 and 20 years old. Unlike Shu Huaiyi, selected purely for physical attributes, the Zhang brothers combined beauty with education, artistic talent, and sophistication. Zhang Yi had features poets compared to carved jade. Zhang Chongzong played the jade flute beautifully, wrote calligraphy collectors saw, and could discuss philosophy with genuine insight. Princess Taiping discovered them because she understood. Her aging mother now wanted more than physical satisfaction. The Empress had complained about Hai's crude manners and limited conversation. The Zhang brothers were young enough to be her grandsons, but sophisticated enough to treat her as a desirable woman rather than an elderly patron purchasing their attention. They praised her poetry with specific observations showing they had actually read it. They listened to her stories with apparent fascination. They made her laugh. The Empress began summoning them together, both brothers, simultaneously, coordinating their attentions according to her direction. They remained overnight multiple times weekly, sometimes 3 or 4 consecutive nights, and she made certain Shu Huaiyi knew about it. She did not simply transfer her attention, she displayed it. She had the Zhang brothers accompany her to public events where Shu Huaiyi would be present. She touched them in his view, adjusting their clothing, brushing hair from their faces, demonstrating physical intimacy that she no longer showed him. She assigned the brothers apartments adjacent to her own chambers, forcing Shu Huaiyi to pass their doors when he came for his increasingly rare summons. This was cruelty refined to art. She could have quietly reduced his access. Instead, she maximized his humiliation. She wanted him to suffer. She wanted to watch. The gatherings continued, but now the Zhang brothers presided as favorites, while Shu Huai sat among ordinary attendees. He was forced to perform poetry alongside men who had entered service years after him, competing for attention he had once monopolized. The Empress would comment on performances, praising the Zhang brothers effusively while offering Shu Huaiyi only polite acknowledgement. For 3 weeks this continued. His mental state deteriorated visibly. Palace servants reported him muttering too. Himself in corridors, he stopped eating regularly. He alternated between desperate attempts to regain favor and furious outbursts that alarmed everyone who witnessed them. Then came the night that would end his career. He gathered followers from the White Horse Temple. He armed them with torches and oil. He marched through dark streets to the Mingtang, the sacred hall of light the Empress had built as the spiritual center of her dynasty. A wooden tower rising nearly 300 feet, visible from every corner of the capital, containing treasures accumulated over decades, and he burned it to the ground. The flames lasted 3 days. What had taken years and fortunes to build was destroyed in one night of jealous rage. Here's the part that reveals her complete control. She did not execute him. She summoned him to her chambers. He arrived expecting death. Instead, she bared him for his weakness, his childish inability to accept that she would enjoy other men as she pleased. She made him kneel before her while she catalogued his failures, and then she forgave him. She permitted him back into her bed. She let him believe his position might be restored. This was her particular pleasure. The absolute power to destroy him wielded not through destruction, but through mercy that demonstrated her complete control. She could have killed him. She chose to keep him alive and suffering instead, but his position never recovered. His summons grew rare. His influence evaporated. In 695, his frustration exploded into violence against his rivals. He encountered Zheng Yiji in a palace corridor and attacked him. He beat him savagely before guards intervened. Zheng Yiji's face was bloodied. His arm was broken. He would walk with a slight limp for the rest of his life. This time, forgiveness did not come. The Empress summoned Princess Taiping and gave instructions. Palace servants cornered Shu Huaiyi in an isolated courtyard. They beat him with wooden staves until his bones shattered. They continued until he stopped moving. They burned his body. The man who had burned her Mingtang was himself reduced to ashes. The abbot who had struck down her chief minister died begging for mercy from palace servants. But the Zhang brothers were far from her only companions. Let me tell you about the others. Shen Nangu was approximately 35 when he first entered her service. Court physicians summoned originally to treat persistent headaches. He knew classical medicine, but also Taoist practices promising longevity through cultivation of vital energy. The headache treatments worked remarkably well. The Empress summoned him repeatedly. During one extended session, as he worked on her neck and shoulders, she directed his hands lower. He complied. She directed lower still. What began as medical treatment became something quite different. Shen Nanchu visited approximately twice monthly for the next 8 years. His medical knowledge gave him unique value. He understood how to work with an aging body. He brought oils infused with ginseng and other stimulants. His techniques were slower, more methodical than what younger companions provided. He survived where others fell because he understood something crucial. He never sought power, never competed with other favorites. When she attempted to provoke his jealousy by mentioning other companions, he expressed only pleasure that she was well served. When she tested him by reducing his summons, he waited patiently without complaint. This made him less entertaining, but more useful. She kept him as a reliable resource, never bothering to torment him because his lack of emotional investment made torment pointless. When the Empress finally fell, he quietly retired to Hishamtown and lived another 20 years in obscurity. Of the few men who served her intimately and lived to die of old age, Master Bai was different. A former military officer wounded fighting Tibetan raiders reassigned to ceremonial duties while injuries healed. Tall, powerfully built, body marked with scars from combat. A crane service scout noticed him in a bathhouse and filed a report. His scars apparently appealed to the Empress, who found his battle-marked body more interesting than the unblemished flesh of quarters. She assigned him a particular role at her gatherings. While refined favorites performed poetry and music, Master B demonstrated feats of strength. He lifted heavy objects. He wrestled other men for her entertainment. He stood motionless for hours as a living statue, while the Empress conducted business. Summoning him to her side when she wanted to feel his muscles or trace his scars in front of visitors, she enjoyed the contrast. Beautiful young men with soft hands flanking her, while a scarred warrior knelt at her feet. The physical power he possessed reduced to decorative attendance. The man who had killed enemies in battle, waiting silently until she chose to notice him. But Master Ba made a fatal error. He started believing her attention meant he could act as other favorites acted. He began accepting bribes from officials. He offered opinions on military appointments during intimate hours. The Zhang brothers exercised influence subtly. Master B was not subtle. His interventions were clumsy, obvious. Worse, his military suggestions were occasionally wrong. In 695, after approximately 2 years of service, he was abruptly dismissed. No explanation. Reassigned to a frontier garrison in the far northwest. He died within 4 months. The official report claimed Tibetan raiders killed him. Soldiers who survived told different stories. They said Master Bai was summoned to meet a visiting inspector from the capital. He entered a tent and never emerged. His body was found the next morning with his throat cut. Men who displeased the Empress did not simply lose favor. They disappeared. The monk Chen Xuanzang served during a single remarkable year. He was 26. A junior monk at Angguo Temple. When a crane service scout noticed his exceptional beauty during services, he passed examination. His dimensions were above average, his stamina excellent. His monastic training had taught discipline and patience. His particular appeal was his combination of physical capability with genuine religious devotion. He approached service as spiritual practice, bringing meditative focus that more self-interested companions could not match. But she also found it entertaining to corrupt him. She would engage him in theological discussions during intimate moments, forcing him to maintain philosophical discourse while his body responded to her attentions. She would ask him to recite sutras while she touched him, taking visible pleasure in the conflict between his religious training and his physical reactions. After 12 months, his summons stopped. No explanation. Perhaps the game of corrupting him had ceased to entertain her. Perhaps she had extracted everything interesting from the contrast between his piety and his service. He requested transfer to a remote southern monastery. He lived another 40 years as a respected monk, eventually becoming abbot. He never spoke of what had occurred. Monks who knew him later had no idea their austere scholarly leader had once spent nights in the imperial bedchamber. There was also a man known in records only as the Wrestler. He was brought to court from Ostern province, where he had achieved fame in local competitions. He was not particularly handsome by court standards. His face was rough, his manner uncultured, but his physical strength was extraordinary, and his stamina in the ring had become legendary. The Empress was curious. Whether his stamina translated beyond wrestling, she had him examined. It did. She kept him specifically for nights. When she wanted something rougher than what her refined favorites provided, he was never invited to gatherings with other companions. He was summoned privately late at night through back passages that kept his visits hidden from other favorites, who might have objected to sharing her attention with someone so far beneath their status. He served for approximately 3 years before vanishing from records entirely. No death is recorded, no reassignment, no exile. He simply stops appearing in any document. Whether he displeased her or knew too much, or simply outlived his usefulness is unknown. He was erased so thoroughly that modern historians only know he existed from a single fragment mentioning his arrival at court. The political dimensions of the Empress's intimate relationships extended far beyond personal pleasure. What she built was a weapon. When General Kai Chang secured the northeastern frontier against Khitan raiders, she rewarded him by summoning his 23-year-old nephew to Crane's service examination. The nephew passed and entered service. General Hay's loyalty became absolute. His family was now bound to the Empress through ties transcending ordinariolence. Any move against her endangered his nephew. When Minister Wei Yuanzheng began building a faction she considered threatening, she used a former companion named Lu Jing to seduce the minister's daughter. The seduction succeeded. The daughter became pregnant. The scandal destroyed the minister's reputation. He was demoted and spent his remaining years in obscurity. Chancellor Pion presented a more serious problem. He had publicly opposed her assumption of imperial title, arguing a woman ruling as emperor violated cosmic order. His opposition was principled. He could not be bought or seduced. So she used one of her current companions, a young man named Zhang Jia, to befriend the chancellor's youngest son. The friendship deepened over months. Zhang Jia reported everything the son revealed: his father's activities, his meetings, his private opinions. When she had accumulated sufficient information, she struck. Chancellor Pei was arrested for plotting rebellion. The evidence included letters Zhang Jia had obtained through the manufactured friendship. The chancellor was executed. His sons exiled, his property confiscated. She had used an intimate companion as an intelligence operative, extracting information through a friendship the target never suspected. But no one mastered political application like the Zhang brothers. By the early 700s, they had transformed bedchamber access into governmental control. They installed their brother as provincial governor, their cousin as military commander, their uncle in the censorate. Every significant family member gained position through their influence. They controlled information flowing to the Empress. As she aged past 78, she relied increasingly on the brothers to summarize reports. What they told her shaped her understanding. What they withheld, she never learned. They sold appointments systematically. A provincial governorship cost approximately 10,000 strings of cash. Military commands cost more. Capital positions cost most. The gatherings by this point included performances specifically designed for her entertainment. Young men danced in ways emphasizing their physical attributes. They competed in games requiring them to display strength and endurance. They composed poetry praising her beauty in terms that would have been absurd applied to any other woman her age, but which she required nonetheless. The Zhang brothers managed these events, selecting participants, orchestrating performances, ensuring the Empress remained entertained. They understood their position depended on her continued engagement with life. An Empress who grew bored might begin questioning why she needed favorites at all. By 704, the Jing brothers effectively ruled China. The Empress was 80, frequently ill, confined to chambers for weeks. Senior ministers suspected some decrees had never actually been approved by her, that the brothers issued orders in her name without her knowledge. Opposition formed slowly. Crown Prince Leon resented their power. Chancellor Zhang Zhangyi believed they were destroying the dynasty. General Li Duo feared they planned to seize the throne when the Empress died. These men began meeting in secret. The opportunity came in the first month of 705. The Empress fell seriously ill. The Zhang brothers sealed the palace, allowing no one to enter or leave without their permission. On the 15th day, the conspirators struck. General Li Duo led 500 soldiers into the palace compound. They killed guards at the outer gates. They fought through defenders and courtyards, cutting down dozens loyal Zhang brothers. They smashed through the doors of the Empress's chambers. They found her propped in bed, conscious but weak, the Zhang brothers standing beside her. She demanded to know who authorized this intrusion. Chancellor Zhang Zhangji announced they had come to execute the traitors, Zhang Yiji and Zhang Chonggong. The Empress attempted to protect them. She declared their innocence. She ordered soldiers to withdraw, but she was an 81-year-old woman lying sick in bed, her commands ignored by men already committed. The Jing brothers were seized. They were dragged from the chamber while the Empress watched helplessly. They were beheaded in the courtyard outside her window. The executioner used a heavy blade requiring multiple strokes for each brother. Their screams carried through the walls. Their heads were mounted on pikes at the palace gate. Their bodies were dismembered and distributed among
conspirators. The purge that followed was comprehensive. Zhang Chengyi, the brother's brother, was dining when soldiers burst through his doors. He died before finishing his meal. Zhang Tongyin, the military commander cousin, made it 30 meters before pursuers caught him. They brought his head back in a basket. Zhang Quanyi, the censorate uncle, was strangled in his cell before trial. He had started naming other men the brothers had worked with. Someone decided he knew too much to keep talking. Every relative who had benefited from the brothers' position was hunted. Extended family 3 degrees removed were executed. Servants were tortured for information, then killed or enslaved. Former companions of the Empress who had associated with the brothers faced similar fates. Lu Jing, who had helped destroy Minister Wei years earlier, was tortured until he confessed to crimes he probably had not committed, then executed. The crane service was abolished, its records were ordered burned. Agents traveled the empire identifying former candidates who might possess dangerous knowledge. Some were bribed into silence, some were killed, some vanished entirely. Within months, the entire apparatus the Empress had constructed over decades was dismantled. The Empress was forced to abdicate, power transferred to her son Zhengzhong, the same son she had deposed and exiled 22 years earlier. She was moved to a separate palace, stripped of the title she had held for 15 years. She lived another 9 months, increasingly frail, rarely speaking. The woman who had controlled thousands of men could not control the servants who brought her meals. She died in December 705. She was 81 years old. She had ruled China directly or indirectly for over 50 years. She had maintained her appetites and her power simultaneously until her body finally failed and her enemies finally found courage to strike. She was Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in Chinese history. She killed her own daughter to destroy a rival. She mutilated enemies and watched them die in agony. She built a bureaucracy to supply her bedchamber with thousands of candidates. She hosted elaborate gatherings well into her 8th decade, surrounded by young men desperate for her attention. She played psychological games with favorites, enjoying their jealousy and desperation. She rewarded those who pleased her with wealth beyond imagination, and she erased those who failed her from existence. Her tomb stands unopened near Xi'an, guarded by stone statues. The tablet marking her grave bears no inscription, the wordless stelae inviting future generations to render their own judgments. 13 centuries later, we are still rendering them. If this journey into the hidden chambers of Chinese history has revealed truths traditional accounts tried to bury, there are more secrets waiting. Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another chapter powerful men wanted forgotten. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Comment below telling me what other powerful women you want investigated. These stories deserve to be told. I will see you in the next.